Um, so today we're going to talk about the Iran war because it's still all that matters. Um, Now, before we get into Iran, I just wanted to address a topic that continues to come up, and I personally have gotten asked about it several times. Um, people ask or make the case, look, it's not our war, right? It's not our war. It may be Israel's war, but it's not our war. Why should we get pulled into it? And then the other question is, uh, or the other argument is, Trump is going against his campaign promises of no forever wars. So if we're going to discuss these two questions, it's not our war, and Trump is going against his campaign of no forever wars. It's incredibly important to really dig in deep and understand what the true charges are, what the accusations are. What is it that people are actually so upset about, right? Because a lot of times people will put up a veneer, they'll put up a disguise to conceal, to hide what they're really upset about. So if you're going to do real analysis, and as you all know, we do real analysis here, it's important to strip away the disguises, to take off the mask, and let's get to what people are really upset about. What is their true accusation? Well, their true accusation is it's all Israel's fault. And let's be honest about it. Got to be honest about it. When you're really upset about Israel, and if people have questions at the end, we can discuss it. But if you're really upset about Israel, what is it that you're really upset about? You're angry at the Jews, right? You're angry at the Jews, this idea that the Jews control the world and Israel is the national embodiment of the Jewish people. So, the Jews, Israel, they control the world, they control Trump. They're pushing Trump around and getting him to do what is in the interest of the Jews. So that's really what people are upset about. Now, hatred of Jews has always existed, basically since we can go back to the beginning of civilized man. There's always been hatred of Jews. But Jew hatred, it changes and it adapts to a language or to a sentiment that is acceptable. So if we were to go back hundreds of years ago, it was acceptable to hate Jews because of their religion, because they were Jewish, because they weren't practicing the dominant religion of the civilized world, which was Christianity. And you had the Crusades, right? And Jews were slaughtered in mass simply because of their religion. Now, back during the Crusades, you could be spared if you converted. And there are many, many Jews in those days. There were many Jews who converted. If you go to Europe, these people are known as the conversos, which, are people who converted from Judaism to Christianity. It's the way that they survived. And to this day, you can see, in Venezuela, we know some throughout Europe. There are people who are conversos and they sort of rediscover their Jewish heritage. Uh, anyway, history changed, mankind changed, and it became completely unacceptable to kill people, to mistreat people because of their religious beliefs. But it did become acceptable to to hate people because of their race or their ethnicity, right? And there were scientific studies that attempted to show that certain races were inferior. Um, and that's really what Nazism was all about, right? Hitler said we have to have a pure Aryan race, and it became acceptable, certainly in Nazi Germany, and actually throughout many places in Europe, and even in the United States. You had many people subscribe to this view, this ideology, that it was acceptable to mistreat or even exterminate people for their ethnicity or for this race, and that's how you ended up with the Holocaust, right? Jews had to be eliminated, and that was acceptable during those times. You couldn't persecute someone because of their beliefs, but you could for their race. But that too became totally unacceptable, right? Totally unacceptable. And as we turn to the modern world, right? The modern world today, when I say modern world, I'm really meaning today, and not just today, but let's say over the last several years, um, not acceptable to dislike people for their religion or their race or ethnicity, but you could you could dislike people or even hate people because of the country that they come from. Because you don't like the politics of that country, you don't like the foreign policy of that country. So today's Jew hatred takes the form of blaming Israel for everything. And by the way, if you go back in history, why were Jews when they were hated because of their religion? Well, everything was their fault. All the world's problems was because of this religious group. When it came to Hitler, everything was all the problems were due to this ethnic group. And today, all the problems of the world are blamed on the policies of Israel, right? It morphs. Whatever is socially acceptable at the time, that's the ideology that Jew hatred gravitates towards, and it expresses itself through that ideology. Now, I have done a tremendous amount of research on this topic, not just now, but over many years. But recently, I've come across a lot of research that shows that Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and plenty of others, some of them you know their names, they are at the forefront of a well-oiled, well-financed, well-strategized effort to remake the political system and the sociology of the United States, to create a new type of Christian country. In many ways, it's a throwback to the old days of Christianity, when Christianity really did practice very explicit hatred of Jews. But now, this type of Christian nation that they want to build doesn't explicitly single out the Jew. It singles out Israel. It singles out Zionists. And anyone who supports Israel is part of the problem. And their goal, it's like a 10-year project, right? They're beginning now. They're targeting younger generations, mostly men, under 45 and under. This is very prevalent. If you ever want to hear it from Andy, Andy has a whole group of people that he knows that are very much on this bandwagon. And these are former friends of his that, obviously can't be his friends anymore. But they are big fans of Tucker Carlson, big fans of this idea that Israel controls everything, and every bad thing that happens in the world and in the United States is the fault of Israel, and it's dragging us into this war and that war, and all wars in history, they're all Israel's fault, they're all the Jews' fault. Uh, and Tucker, again, he is sort of the main spokesperson for this effort. And they are also making a very explicit appeal to the left in the United States, because as you all know, the radical left here is deeply anti-Israel. That's not new. If you look at the college campuses over the last few years, especially during Israel's war with Gaza, they were exploding with Jew hatred that was disguised as, no, it's just Zionism. So Tucker Carlson is going to continue to rail against Israel. When this war ends, he will find other reasons, other excuses to demonize Israel. He won't stop because this is their agenda. Candace Owens is on this train. Megyn Kelly, who just did a massive flip-flop, months ago. She's on board. Steve Bannon is on board. But anyway, I want to go back to, so this is the framework to understand the issue. So I wanted to really uncover that, take the mask off. But going to the precise question of what is in this for the United States? Why should the United States be fighting this war? Well, I could go on and on. This could be definitely take up the whole class, but I just want to spend a minute on it. Well, yes, Iran is dangerous to Israel. Iran is dangerous to Europe, and it's dangerous to the United States. Iran has killed 1,000 Americans and probably many more than that. Okay, this is just the numbers that have been sort of counted. I'm sure it's much more than that actually. And most of those murders were through terrorism. Almost all of them are through terrorism. Iran has tried to assassinate Trump. In fact, there's a legal case going on right now that explicitly accuses Iran of being behind at least one assassination attempt against Trump. Iran had ballistic missiles. They were on their way to developing intercontinental ballistic missiles that could cross continents, reaching the United States. And the goal was to have a nuclear warhead fitted on top of those intercontinental continental ballistic missiles. And we would certainly be a target. And once they can strike the United States, they hold the United States hostage. And Iran then basically has carte blanche to do whatever it wants, because is the United States ever going to confront a lunatic country that's willing to die for their religious cause? Probably not. So once Iran goes nuclear and has the ability, the capacity to strike the United States, we pretty much become powerless because we're not as insane as them. It's like playing a game of chicken, two cars driving at each other, going 150 miles an hour down the road. Who's going to swerve first? Well, Iran is not going to swerve, right? Once they have nuclear, and we can see they're not swerving, right? You can see it right now before our very eyes. They are not swerving, right? The United States and Israel is picking off one leader after another. We'll talk about that soon enough. But Iran doesn't swerve. And once they get nuclear capability, the odds that they swerve basically evaporate to zero. So are we supposed to wait and wait for Iran to develop, which they were very close to developing, intercontinental ballistic missiles and nuclear capability? Are we going to wait for that? And then what? And the analogy I like to give is, are we supposed to wait? We know there's a terrorist. We know there's a group of terrorists within the United States. We know it. We know they have an intention to blow up many buildings and kill thousands and thousands of American citizens. Are we going to wait until they're about to pull the trigger before we do something about it? Or once the FBI knows about this terrorist group, do we move and take them out and remove ourselves from danger? Right? The answer should be obvious. The answer should be obvious. You do not wait until they're about to pull the trigger. So is this in the United States' interest to take out the Iranians before they have the ability to really do massive, massive damage to the United States? And they've already killed many American citizens. They're firing missiles at their so-called, ally Muslim brothers in the Middle East, right? They're throwing missiles at them right now. You don't think they're going to strike us? Of course they're going to strike us. It would be insanity for us to continue to sit on our hands and do nothing. Okay, so that's why it's in the U.S. interest to get involved and to launch this war. What about the idea that this goes against President Trump's mandate? Well, honestly, not at all. Yes, Trump has said that he doesn't want to get into forever wars. But this is not a forever war. And just as important as Trump's pledge not to get involved in forever wars, Trump has made the case for decades, not just in his two presidential campaigns, but for decades that Iran was in incredible danger. And we shouldn't sit back idly by and watch them become more and more dangerous. You can find video of Trump as a young man talking about this. And then when Trump was a candidate, how many times has he told us that Obama made the worst deal in history and Iran cannot go nuclear? It simply cannot happen. Has said many times that's not going to happen under my watch. So he's not going back on his campaign promises. He's following through with his campaign promise. He's not allowing Iran to, and by the way, it's not only nuclear, right? Once you develop ballistic missiles, you are a huge, huge threat. So Trump also campaigned on peace through strength. Peace through strength. Strength does not mean watching your most dangerous enemies obtain nuclear weapons and intercontinental ballistic missiles, right? That's not what peace through strength is. That's weakness. That's weakness. And there are times that the United States must exercise its military might in order to ensure peace, right? If we did not act now, the war later on would be far, far, far more dangerous if it happened at all, right? We might not do anything, and then Iran would be capable of exercising what's known as nuclear blackmail. Because we're insane, because we're the most insane actor in the world, and we have nukes, we can do anything we want in the world because you know we will use our nukes. You may not because you're not nearly as insane as I am, right? It goes back to the game of chicken, who swerves first, right? In order to have peace, sometimes you have to exercise your strength. So this is the war to bring deterrence to the Middle East, to stop Iran in its tracks. And it also has the very important spillover of deterring other enemies that we have, most importantly, China, which happens to be the number one financer of Iran, an arms supplier of Iran. They are the reason why Iran has become what it has become is because of China. So if we want to deter China, this is the best way to do it. If we're worried about China taking over Taiwan, you're sending a message. You want to mess with the United States? Look what we are capable of doing, and don't think we're bluffing. Okay. So I hope I answered that adequately. And now I want to bring up this resignation of Joe Kent. That is in the news yesterday and today. He was the number two to Tulsi Gabbard. So Joe Kent was the director of national security the director of the National Security Counterterrorism Center. Now, Joe Kent was apparently, right? I can't vouch for this. I don't have firsthand knowledge of this. I don't know Joe Kent. I don't know people who he specifically leaked to, but it's widely said that he was a known leaker. He was leaking secrets from inside the Trump administration to the media. And there's been many, many leaks. We've known that. But there haven't been many leaks recently. And probably one of the reasons for that is they're getting rid of the leakers. And Joe Kent has been shut out of intelligence briefings for several months now. And in fact, from what I understand, Tulsi Gabbard was told that she should probably fire him. But at least as of yesterday, she had not done that yet. But it's quite conceivable that Joe Kent knew that he was about to be fired, so he resigned instead. Again, I don't know this. That is particularly speculative. The idea that he was a leaker probably is pretty sound. There's pretty sound evidence behind that. Whether or not he was about to be fired, that's more conjecture. I don't know that for sure, but very conceivable. But again, he had been shut out from intelligence briefings because he was not trusted anymore. And um, why was he, it's clear that Joe Kent, at least as of late, he was very much against the war with Iran. And he is now outwardly claiming that the reason why the Trump administration went to war is because of pressure from Israel. Now, we know that Joe Kent is very close to Tucker Carlson. In fact, his first interview is going to be that he's accepted is going to be with Tucker Carlson. No surprise at all. He's also very connected to what's known as the Quincy Center. The Quincy Center is this. I've discussed it before many months ago. The Quincy Center is a think tank that is co-funded, get this, co-funded by radical left-wing, billionaire, multi-billionaire George Soros, right, who's on the left, and radical right-winger or woke right-winger, the Koch brothers, who are a longtime financier of the Republican Party, but sort of they're in the extreme of the Republican Party, totally aligned with Tucker Carlson. They jointly funded the Quincy Institute, and they've packed the Quincy Institute with people very much of the mindset of Joe Kent, very anti-Israel, very much a Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens mindset. So Tucker Carlson, along with Joe Kent and many others, they also claim that the Iraq War of 2003 was also Israel's idea, right? Israel's idea. Israel dragged us into that war. Now, there is huge amounts of clear documentation that that is completely false. In fact, the Israeli government at that time very much was against the United States going into the Iraq War, warning even back then that Iraq would likely turn into a quagmire because of all the sectarianism in Iraq. And also, Israel argued, look, the real risk here is not Iraq, it's Iran. And if you destabilize Iraq, then you're going to create this massive opening for Iran. And that advice turned out to be very solid, very prophetic, actually. But anyone who accuses Israel of pulling the United States into the Iraq War is either knowingly lying and distorting history terribly, or they just don't know any history, and they're just kind of making some crazy assumption that's way off base. But more on Joe Kent. Any public official that is driven by these conspiracy theories and myths, right, that Israel is behind everything, they are not worthy of a responsibility to be running this counterterrorism center, right? It's a very important office. And if the person heading our counterterrorism efforts doesn't have a clear head of who our enemies are and who our allies are, right? Our enemy is Iran, very clearly. Our ally, probably our best ally in the world, we'll get into this in a little bit also, is Israel. If you're confusing those two, you should not be running counterterrorism in the United States, right? That's a very big problem. So thankfully, this guy is gone. Right? This guy and Tucker, what are they trying to do? They're trying to gaslight the American public about who the real threat is, right? And, again, I want to make it clear. The Iranian regime, which calls death to America on a daily basis, they have already killed more Americans than any country since Vietnam. And again, it's all through terrorism. So once again, if Joe Kent cannot tell the difference between a model ally and a sworn enemy, this guy needs to be gone. And he is gone. But I'll tell you something that's absolutely fascinating, but predictable, is media outlets like the New York Times. And by the way, the New York Times, we bashed the New York, I bashed the New York Times a lot. It's actually the most widely read media source by far in the United States. It's got 13 million subscribers. 13 million subscribers. No one else comes even close. I think the Wall Street Journal has like 3 or 4 million. Um, so the United States continues to be very impactful. But anyway, fascinating, but very predictable that the New York Times, CNN, as well as many others, are treating Joe Kent's resignation as a principled stance from a serious counterterrorism leader. Okay? Now, when Joe Kent was appointed to that post, the New York Times blasted the appointment, blasted the appointment. They actually called him an extremist, a conspiracy theorist. Because even back then he had crazy ideas, right? Trump himself did not do any vetting, right? These guys, Tucker said, Trump, we want people here, so and probably Don Jr., Tucker for sure. So a lot of extremist people, woke right people, were put in very important positions in the Trump administration. Again, this is a topic we've discussed about, and early on, it caused me quite a bit of concern. But again, the New York Times now since they're so anti-Trump, now they call this guy righteous. But they denounced him when he was appointed, right? Again, not surprising. Now, a big question I have, and we are going to get specifically to Iran soon enough, but a big question I have is, could this group, Tucker Carlson has a big following, might they take over the Republican Party? And it's an important question because, look, the radicals certainly took over the Biden administration and took over the Democratic Party, right? The Democratic Party, I believe, is a lost cause. Could the same thing happen to the Republican Party? Well, look, let's take a look at the polls. There was just a poll released the other day by YouGov, which is a very prestigious pollster. And they asked the question among MAGA supporters, kind of hardcore MAGA, as well as just general Republicans. Question is, do you support Trump's handling of the situation with Iran? And the results were overwhelming. Among just MAGA supporters, 87% approve of Trump's handling of Iran, and only 6% disapprove. Okay, so Tucker is not really having many inroads among MAGA supporters, despite what it appears on social media. And if you look at his followers of his podcasts, it's enormous. But in terms of the MAGA base, firmly in support of Trump and his efforts in Iran. What about Republicans generally speaking? It's also very favorable for Trump. 81% support Trump's efforts in Iran, only 12% disapprove. Now, the country is much more evenly divided, and that's because Democrats overwhelmingly are against the war. They're overwhelmingly against Israel. They're anything that Trump does, they're against just by definition. Right? They do not think of things they don't look at the world objectively. If Trump is behind it, they're against it. So you have a mixture of just being anti-Trump and being anti-Israel, and anything that is good for Israel is bad in their view. So there's a lot of people in the Democratic Party who fall under that category. Okay, so bottom line, yeah, I do think this effort to change society in America and to change the political, the political system in America to be, very anti-Israel and anti-Jewish, it's a real risk. It's something I'm deeply concerned about. You know it. We've discussed it before. But at least for now, within the MAGA movement and the Democratic Party, we still seem to be on fairly solid footing. But their target group are younger people. So, and again, they're on a 10-year plan here. So, how this looks in 10 years, I think, is more of an open question. But at least as things stand today, we look to be in reasonably solid shape. But again, as each year goes on, we do have to continue to examine this and be concerned. Now to the war. Now to the war. So the United States and Israel have been methodically hitting their targets. And most recently, Israel specifically has been eliminating the leadership of the IRGC and the paramilitary group, the Basij. Together, the IRGC and the Basij have murdered and maimed and tortured and raped hundreds of thousands of Iranians. So they're hitting these two organizations very, very hard. Now, it seems that Iranians themselves are the ones identifying where specific targets are located, human targets. And they're calling this in to the Israelis and letting them know where these leaders are located. It's truly fantastic. Now, we just had the elimination of Ali Larijani, who really was the de facto leader of Iran because the supreme leader we know is now incapacitated. He's either in a coma or some say he's in Russia, being treated. Some say that maybe he's not even alive. I personally believe he probably is alive. But so anyway, Ali Larijani, the de facto leader, gone, eliminated. The head of the Basij, eliminated. Just last night, the chief of intelligence in Iran, eliminated. And more is coming. More is coming. More of these targeted strikes are on the way. So if you are an officer in the IRGC, or if you are a high-level person in the Basij, you're going to question orders to launch missiles, right? Because at some point, you're going to ask yourself, who am I even working for at this point, right? Who am I working for? All my leaders are getting wiped out. US and Israeli intelligence dominance inside Iran is now unmistakable, and everybody in Iran knows it. Whether you're in the IRGC, whether you're in the Basij, whether you're just a regular citizen, you know US and Israeli intelligence are everywhere and seeing everything. So every regime insider, IRGC, Basij, every nuclear weapon scientist now lives with the same reality. They know they're visible. They know they're vulnerable. They know they are targetable. The clock is ticking on each one of them. We're hearing from reports inside of Iran that huge numbers of desertions are taking place from within the Iranian security apparatus. We also hear that there's growing tensions between different branches. We haven't seen outright fractures, but the reports are, these are the reports, right? Big desertions and fractures. Now, I have to admit, after seeing this regime in power since 1979, and after seeing up close and personal just my experience from other countries, Venezuela, the Chavez and Maduro regime, they never cracked. It makes me skeptical of these optimistic reports. So yes, I'm a skeptic. But we know for a fact that there are tensions and there are desertions. But we don't know how widespread these dissensions and desertions really are. So let's say it's 10% of the security units that we're seeing tension and desertions. Okay, if it's just 10%, and this 10% are not the 10% that's critical for regime survival, then we're going to get a lot of signals that hint that the regime might collapse. But again, if it's just 10% and this 10% isn't critical to the survival of the regime, then it's just noise and the regime won't collapse. On the other hand, if it turns out to be like 70 to 80% of the IRGC and 70 to 80% of the besieged are running away to save their lives, then we could be nearing a decisive tipping point. Now, again, I don't think that's where we are right now. But there are a few reasons to be tentatively optimistic. Okay. One reason is there's an organization known as Iran International. Iran International. And that's where a lot of this information is coming from. Iran International. They've got eyes on the ground, right? And these eyes on the ground report to regional bureaus of Iran International. And it's these regional bureaus that are feeding us the information about the dissensions and the tensions within the regime. Now, the encouraging piece is the Ayatollahs want these guys silenced and they're trying to target them. And the reason why they may want them silenced is because their reports could be accurate. Their reports could really be shining light on a soft spot. So perhaps the cracks in the regime are serious. Okay, that's one reason for encouragement. Another reason for encouragement, Israel specifically is escalating its ongoing hunt for IRGC members and besieged members. They have wiped out the command structure of these organizations, including local headquarters and local commanders. And again, they just killed they've killed the head of the IRGC, they've killed the head of the Basij, they've killed the head of the chief of intelligence. They're going deeper and deeper. One guy gets killed, his replacement gets killed. This is what's been going on. Now, again, I think if I had to make a bet, my bet right now would be we're not close to the regime cracking. But neither Israel nor the United States have blinked. And this is not over. This is not over. They've got many, many more targets to hit. Many more strikes against the IRGC and the Basij are on the way, and they are coming every single day. Now, I mentioned that Larijani was killed, right? The de facto leader of Iran. So how big of a deal is this? So I want to quote Admiral James Stavridis. This is an admiral, a retired admiral who is really a tremendous expert on all things military in the United States. I've been following him for actually many, many, many years. He's quite good. He was asked the question, so is this a big deal? And his answer is, this is a big deal. He said, if killing Khamenei, the first supreme leader who was killed the first day of the war, in the first 5 minutes of the war, if killing Khamenei was a 10 out of 10, this is an 8.5 out of 10. This is a big deal, taking out these two and drilling down below, going to the top level, then to the next level. He calls it the 5-star level, then the 4-star level, then the 3-star level, then the 2-star level, right? We're taking leader after leader out. And then he said, at some point, you may get down to the layer of the rock formation where you might actually be able to have a conversation with people in the regime. People who might be willing to change the behavior of the regime. People who might actually be willing to negotiate genuinely. Interesting point. So, are we going for regime change or are we going for negotiation? And we're going to get to regime change again a bit later, but you actually have to have both of these options as viable options, right? You can't commit to one or the other. You leave both options. The possibility of negotiation, if you get to people who are actually willing to make compromises and change their behavior, yes, that could be a possibility. Like a Delcy Rodriguez in Venezuela. But if you don't have that option, right? If there's no one to talk to, then you leave that option open for a regime change again, which we're going to get to soon. So, what are the objectives of the war? Well, a very senior source in Israel anonymously provided five objectives of the war. And he didn't say these were just Israeli objectives. I assume that they're joint objectives of Israel and the United States. And when you hear them, you say, yeah, that sounds reasonable that they're objectives of both countries. Number one, to act jointly with the United States to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this is a very good sign, in my opinion, because until now, it's really been exclusively the United States that has been trying to open up the Strait of Hormuz. But it's great that it makes sense that Israel would join this effort. But it's excellent because Israel has, really phenomenal intelligence, probably better than the US intelligence because it's their neighborhood and they've been gathering intelligence on Iran for many decades now. So we know that they're incredibly sophisticated. So that is a positive development. And again, this is a key objective, a key of one of their five objectives. Number two, to permanently deny any future Iranian regime the ability to again close the Strait of Hormuz, right? And one of the one of the ideas that is being developed is to create alternative channels to get oil out of the Persian Gulf into Europe. Now, Saudi Arabia can already do some of that. So 20 million barrels a day of oil had been going through the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi Arabia can export 7 million barrels a day out of the Persian Gulf towards Europe because they've developed their own pipeline. So 7 out of 20, it doesn't kind of fill the gap, but it's something. So they're going to be, and they already have, the truth is there are already other pipelines. We just need to put this on our pedal to our foot to the metal, to the pedal, and get this done. So that's the second objective, clearing this, making sure that this can never happen again in the future. Number three, to dismantle Iran's weapons industry with an emphasis on ballistic missile capabilities. Right, we know this has been going on. They're not just targeting the stockpile of missiles, but they have actually, by this point, they've accomplished this goal apparently. Iran can no longer manufacture missiles anymore, right? At least for this war. All those their supply chain, their missile manufacturing industry has been devastated, so they cannot restock. So that goal has been completed. The complete destruction of Iran's nuclear program. This means extracting or destroying or making it impossible to get to their enriched uranium. And we know that they have enriched uranium sitting somewhere under a lot of rubble in Iran. So we need to get that and make sure that we set that program back not only a few more years, but let's say a decade, 15 years, 20 years. and hopefully forever if you can change the behavior of the regime. And then number five, the fifth goal, to create the conditions for regime change. To create the conditions for regime change. Now, the conditions could be new people to talk with that are willing to change their behavior. Or number two, just a completely, new people entirely that have nothing to do with the current regime. And we're going to talk about how that could be accomplished. So those are the goals. We're seeing again the decapitation of the regime leadership, their headquarters, their infrastructure, their ability to communicate with one another. In my opinion, both the United States and Israel are doing the work to set the conditions for the population to take back their government when the time comes, right? So it's not like the United States is going to do the regime change itself, but they're going to create the opening, to create the window, to open up the window so the population can jump through that window, rise into the streets, and create regime change for themselves. Okay. So how is the United States planning on taking control of the Strait of Hormuz and freeing it? Well, we don't know exactly. We don't know exactly. We may have some hints. The United States is sending at least 2,500 Marines. And that could be, there's a lot of, it might, that those Marines could be there to seize the enriched uranium. They could be there, and this is what more people think, they could be there to take over Karg Island. Karg Island is where almost, not almost, all of Iran's oil is stored, and it's the point from which the oil is exported. So if the United States takes over Karg Island, Iran is deprived of all of its economic resources, right? Pretty much all of Iran's money comes from oil. If the United States takes over Karg Island, Iran can't sell that oil to anybody anymore, and you starve them out, right? You starve them out. They can't pay anybody. They can't import any goods. Can't finance anything. Can't access any more military equipment from abroad. You basically suck off all their oxygen. So that's key. So maybe those Marines are going to take over Carr Island. That's a possibility. And Marines are experts at conquering and taking territory, right? They have a long history. This is right in their wheelhouse. So that's what they might be doing. Now, also as it relates to the Strait of Hormuz, last night, U.S. forces successfully dropped multiple 5,000 pound deep penetrator bombs on Iranian missile sites all along the coastline near the Strait of Hormuz. Why did they do that? Why were the United States dropping these 5,000 pound bunker busters? Because they were taking out Iranian cruise missiles. And these missiles are used to interrupt, to be fired at international shipping. So the United States is destroying Iran's capacity to fire missiles at international ships carrying oil. Now, a few hours ago, just continuing along the lines of the damage that the United States and Israel are causing to the Iranian regime, a few hours ago, the United States and Israel began a joint bombing campaign against Iran's gas infrastructure. Right? Again, this happened just a few hours ago. It's why oil prices jumped again this morning, and that sent the stock market down. This joint operation struck Iranian gasoline facilities in an area called South Pars. And they had one main goal. The main goal to take out these gasoline facilities is to cripple Iran's power grid. You see, these facilities that were hit account for somewhere around 75% of Iran's natural gas production. Okay, so 75% of Iran's natural gas production is getting taken out. Why is that so important? Because about 80% of Iran's electrical grid is fired by gas, right? So if you take out these gasoline facilities, you destroy their electrical grid. And if you destroy their electrical grid, you massively undermine their energy security, right? They have no energy security anymore. They have no energy. They simply can't function. So the United States is hitting them militarily, and now they've begun to squeeze them to cut off all their financial and economic lifeline. So what's going on in terms of international support for Iran? We talk about Iran being isolated. Let's get into that a little bit. So while the US media has been constantly criticizing this war, criticizing Trump, and the Democratic Party are criticizing Trump, and you have certain elements on the so-called, it's hard to even call them right wing anymore, but we'll call them right wing for lack of a better term, the right wing, the Tucker Carlsons, though they're criticizing the war. But most importantly, Iran's neighbors, the Arab Gulf states, are actually pressuring Trump to continue the strikes on Iran and even to intensify the pressure. Now, when I talk about the Arab Gulf states, let's be specific. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Oman. These are the key neighbors of Iran that Iran has been striking with missiles. Just to make this more obvious, more concrete, how do we know that they're supporting the US? Well, the most senior advisor to the president of the United Arab Emirates, his name is Anwar Gargash. In an interview, he told Bloomberg, and I'm going to quote him, he says, Iran made a mistake when it attacked the United Arab Emirates and other countries in the Persian Gulf. It brings these countries closer to Israel and to the United States. He goes on and says this, for countries that have relations with Israel, those relations are growing stronger. And for countries that do not have relations with Israel, I expect additional channels to open. That's a powerful statement. These countries are getting closer to Israel because of this war. I want to quote, we criticize Qatar a lot for really undermining the United States, kind of playing two hands. On the one hand, Qatar has pretends to be a friend. On the other hand, Qatar has been financing a lot of these, the anti-American activities, anti-Israeli activities that go on college campuses. But this was an interesting comment from a big professor at in Qatar. He's a professor at the Doha Institute of Graduate Studies. He says, again, quote, the Iranian regime has crossed every red line. Now it's in everyone's interest, and this includes the Gulf countries, to have the U.S. finish the job. Imagine if the war stops now and Iran declares victory, saying the U.S. has been defeated. Iran would hold the whole region hostage, and every time Iran would be under pressure, it would hit the Gulf countries because that taboo has been broken. Iran hitting them would have worked, and they will continue to do so if not stopped. So why is this so important that the Gulf countries are on board and pushing Trump to finish the job? Why is this important? Because it contradicts the prevailing assessment that if Iran keeps attacking the Gulf states would try to force Trump to end the war and return to business as usual. The exact opposite is happening. The central fear among the Gulf countries is that the war will end when Iran, the chief fear, right? The thing they're most afraid of is that the war ends with Iran still maintaining its military capabilities to continue to threaten them in the future. So their main demand, the main demand of these Arab Gulf countries is to finish the job now. So Iran can never harm us again. So Iran is truly isolated. It's truly isolated in a way that Hamas was never isolated, right? And in a way that Iran has never been isolated before. This is a first time since 1979 where Iran is truly, truly isolated. The only support that it gets, and it's really not real support, it's more of an intellectual support, and it's not even support, right? It's support in the West. You don't have kids demonstrating in the streets for Iran. That's not happening. It's just support through criticism of Trump, right? Getting Trump to try to stop the war. But it's not, no one's actually demonstrating in the streets carrying Iranian flags, at least not that I know of, at least not at this point. The type of support you get, I'll give you like the most effective support that I've heard. I'm going to quote or paraphrase a professor at Georgetown. His name is Professor Ali Vaez, right? And he just sort of captures the sentiment right now. If we keep hitting Iran and if we keep taking out these leaders of Iran, what's going to happen? We're going to create even a more radical element in Iran. And we're going to end up with even a more extreme leadership. Could that happen? Well, anytime you want to make a serious case, you have to point to other examples. This is what like real thinking people do. You look at history, you look at other places in the world. Look, we did this here, we hit them hard, and we actually radicalized the leadership. We created a regime that's even worse. But Ali Vaez and anyone else, none of these people, when they say we're going to create even a more radical regime, they never give any example where this has ever happened. I mean, just think about it. When we killed the Nazis in Germany, did Germany become more radical? When we defeated Japan in World War II, did Japan become more radical? Even in Iraq, right, which was a bit of a real quagmire for us. After, we got rid of Saddam Hussein, we tried to install democracy, we put boots on the ground, we did all things that are now called wrong. Did Iraq become more radical? Does Iraq bother us today? Are we afraid of Iraq? No, Iraq actually has become far less radical. It's become almost a non-problem in the world, a non-problem in the Middle East. Yeah, it's a mess, but it didn't become more radical. We can't think of one example in all of history where when you inflict massive damage, right, you defeat an enemy or nearly defeat them, and a radical government becomes even more radical, right? No one can point to an example, and that's why they don't give examples. So yes, Iran is truly isolated. Iran is truly isolated. Now, I want to say a couple other points. Number one, who are our allies in the world? This was remarkable. Trump is really trying to free up the Strait of Hormuz. Who is the Strait of Hormuz really important for? Right? Yes, it's important for global oil prices, but as we've said before, the United States is 100% self-sufficient for oil, right? We do not depend on imports to satisfy our energy needs. Who needs oil from the Persian Gulf? It's Europe. And Trump asked for European support. He asked them to send ships in order for them to help us escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz to make sure that they're safe. He asked them to supply some boats to help in case we have to take out mines from the Strait of Hormuz. And guess what? Europe, NATO said no. NATO said no. How is that possible? How is that possible? So the Czech Republic said yes. Let's look at the countries that are helping the United States. Obviously, Israel, right? They're working shoulder to shoulder. The Czech Republic said, we're in. We'll send ships. India said, yes, we're in. Two great allies. You know who else said yes, will help? Not with ships because they don't have any, but they're helping us with drone intercept technology, Ukraine. Ukraine is stepping up to the plate. They did not have to even be called. They just stepped up to the plate and offered. So it turns out Zelensky is an ally. What do you know? NATO, Europe, not such an ally. Okay, let's work towards wrapping this up. So where does this leave us? The command structure of the regime has been shattered. Their capabilities have been stripped down to the bone. Yes, we still see them launching missiles, every single day. But as we've said, less and less each day. And whatever scraps they are still pushing out in terms of their missiles, that's their ceiling, right? Every day we're seeing their ceiling. It just comes down every day. Talk about uprisings. Are we going to see uprisings? Well, just starting yesterday, there were reports of mass gatherings of Iranian citizens on streets, right? And we're seeing that people are beginning to participate. They participated in street celebrations. In fact, yesterday, Prime Minister Netanyahu appeared on TV and he said, yes, we're taking out your leaders. Go into the streets and celebrate. Don't worry. No one's going to harm you because we are watching from above. Imagine that. We are watching from above. Go out and celebrate. And people are taking to the streets. They're celebrating. So that's encouraging. So, yes, so many people say that big popular uprisings are not possible because people are terrified. Well, maybe the impossible is becoming possible. Um, a well-known former general who's very plugged in to what's going on the ground, an Israeli general, his last name is Avivi, General Avivi. He says that a turning point is near, and Iranians will soon be urged into the streets under the cover of aerial support. So, after reading so many analyses that regime change in Iran is impossible, perhaps the impossible is in fact looking more possible. The Wall Street Journal just yesterday ran a story that discussed the elimination of Ali Larijani, the de facto leader, and they documented in detail how the Israeli security apparatus is working hand in hand with the Iranian people, right? And I talked about this earlier, that the Iranian people are telling the Israeli intelligence exactly where specific people are located in the IRGC and in the Basij. Pretty remarkable. They're communicating this on secure lines, and almost instantaneously, the human targets are being taken out. The US and Israeli militaries are really at the top of their games right now, carrying out massive, sophisticated operations with minimal losses to American and Israeli forces. Minimal losses. There's no question that more and more the survival of this Iranian regime is coming under question as their leadership, their military assets, and their secret police are all facing real-time destruction, destruction in real time every second. It looks like this regime at some point is not going to be able to explain itself, especially if we take over Karg Island and seize the Strait of Hormuz. So these are to conclude, the next big items on the agenda to follow, to monitor. Do we liberate the Strait of Hormuz in the next couple of weeks? Do we seize Karg Island in the next couple of weeks? And are we going to actually call for popular uprisings in the next few weeks? These are the big agenda items to monitor. So I think it's all looking pretty optimistic, but we still have some weeks to go. So it's far from over. There's still a lot of risk, but certainly headed in a decent direction, or in a good direction, I should say. Okay. Questions, comments?